Hello everyone, this is part 3 of What If Naruto Leaves Konoha and Obtains Jiongu, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Kakazu-san, a pleasure to see you again. Naruto and Fu both jumped as the strangest person they had ever seen emerged from a tree. His face and upper body were two colors, half black, half white, and he possessed yellow eyes, one of them pupil-less, along with light green hair. A large Venus flytrap engulfed and protected his head, making him seem more plant than human, especially with what little they could see of him. Naruto was still fixated on the fact that this person had just morphed out from a tree. On the other hand, Kakazu appeared to be completely unfazed. Zetsu, he greeted in a monotone, how unsurprising to run into you here. Zetsu merely stared at the tall ninja unblinkingly. With just under a week before the Chunin exams began, Kakazu and his pupils had taken their time traveling the relatively short distance from their training spot to the land of rice paddies. The 7-hour trek had led them past the Valley of the End, the last battlefield between Konoha co-founders Senju Hashirama and Uchiha Madara. Naruto and Fu were in awe at the sight of the awesome statues and roaring falls. Kakazu had remained oppressively silent, and Naruto thought that perhaps the bounty hunter had scowled at the Senju's statue as they passed. About 10 miles away from the Valley of the End, the strange man whom Kakazu referred to as Zetsu had popped out of a tree. As Kakazu and Zetsu engaged in conversation, both kids were shocked to realize that the newcomer had two personalities. Apparently Kakazu had already become acquainted with this trait of the Akatsuki member, for he seemed to be unalarmed by the contradicting voices. How have you been, Kakazu-san? Implored White Zetsu politely. Do not engage him, snarled Black Zetsu, we are here for one purpose only, at the command of Leader Sama. That seems to be the general trend of things, Kakazu commented dryly. Leader Sama is a man worthy of respect, Zetsu informed him, but enough of this idle chit-chat. We have other places to be. Come, we'll show you to your target. Zetsu unmitched completely from the tree, walking towards a rather large rock embedded in the ground. 3 sets of eyes followed him. The Akatsuki member held forth his right hand, and Kakazu briefly saw the glint of a ring, positioned on a different finger than the one Konan had flashed him. The rock in front of the plant man slid slowly to the side, revealing a man-sized hole in the ground. Kakazu could only conclude that the rings allowed members access to hideouts that were otherwise off-limits to lower minions. Your requested third teammate is waiting in there, Zetsu said, and Naruto almost thought that he sounded snippy. We have other errands to run. Be nice, warned Zetsu's white side, Haro is a good boy, treat him well. With that, the plant man disappeared into the ground, 2/3 of his audience wide-eyed at the ability. The trio descended into the hole, the rock moving back into place to conceal the opening once Kakazu's head cleared. Dim lamps hanging from the walls illuminated the short staircase that opened into a larger chamber, a circular area about 500 feet in diameter. Naruto was surprised to see the sheer amount of supplies that had been stored within the cavern. Ninja attire from multiple villages hung in neat rows along the walls. The blonde could easily pinpoint the standard Chunin and Jonin flak jackets, as well as Anbu armor, of both the Cloud and Leaf, with a massive surplus of the latter. Outfits from the Hidden Rain and Waterfall, while not as plentiful, could still be spotted interspersed between the two great nations, along with some strange attire with notable black and gray camouflage patterns. Hanging next to each village's clothing were rows of Hatei 8, the one next to the unfamiliar clothing bearing a musical note. Naruto moved closer, deciding he wanted a closer look at the objects of the unknown village. Meanwhile, Fu had stepped in the opposite direction and had begun to admire the stock of weapons. Crates of kunai and shuriken sat against the wall, along with several smaller boxes of paper bombs. Spools of ninja wire and stacks of senbon, the sharp, needle-like tools used mostly by medical ninja, lay in neat piles nearby. Multiple umbrellas, a weapon commonly affiliated with a megacore ninja, hung by their handles from hooks protruding from the wall. Also littering the wall were other weapons. Fu identified several tanto, taken from Leaf Anbu, she guessed, a couple of tonfa, 2 katana, and a kusarigama before her knowledge of blades ran out. Several scrolls also hung from the cavern wall, and the girl wondered briefly at the army that could be prepared with the supplies they were currently surrounded by. Kakazu's interest had been immediately drawn to a point halfway between where his two pupils were standing. I presume that you are the third student Zetsu mentioned, he intoned. At these words, Naruto and Fu both turned their heads in the direction Kakazu's voice seemed to be directed. A boy sat on a crate, his right arm hung loosely over his bent knee. He had short, cobalt blue hair that was styled up in a spiky mohawk and skin a shade darker than pale. The boy jumped off the crate, revealing himself to be slightly taller than Naruto and possessing stormy gray eyes. He was garbed in a black cloak with red trim, a duplicate of the Akatsuki cloaks without any red clouds, and a gray armor piece which was wrapped around his torso. My name is Haro, he said by way of explanation. His voice was soft, but the way his eyes flicked from person to person showed Kakazu that he was more analytical than shy. Haro bowed slightly and added, "You must be Kakazu. I have been informed that I am to follow your instructions." Kakazu smirked beneath his mask. "Ah, a child I would have no problem teaching. He recognizes power and is respectful." Naruto scowled, "and he does not wear a garish uniform." Fu placed her hands on her hips and huffed indignantly. "Tell me, boy, what are your abilities?" Haro's eyes flickered from Naruto to Fu, as if unsure whether to divulge information in front of them. An intelligent genin, Kakazu noted with satisfaction, he watches his surroundings and plans his moves accordingly. It seems that this leader I hear so much about has some worthwhile minions under his command. Speak, he commanded. These will be your teammates, and understanding each other's skills is imperative for your cohesiveness as a unit. Not that Kakazu really cared about teamwork, but that had been important back when he still worked for Takagakure, and would likely prove to be so once again during the Chunin exams. "I'm a sniper," Haro responded. Naruto's scowl gained a touch of confusion as one of Fu's eyebrows rose. Kakazu's hard stare prompted the boy to elaborate. "I'm a mainly long-distance ninjutsu user proficient with Raiten techniques. Using the constant rain present in Omegakure, I'm able to pinpoint targets from far away and take them out. Your leader must be an intelligent man, to use someone with your abilities in such a resourceful fashion," Kakazu observed. "Pain-sama is a man worthy of respect," replied Haro devoutly. "He will save our country by eliminating Hanzo and his group of terrorists." The outburst was the first sign that Haro actually cared about something. "Interesting," mused the bounty hunter, "it seems his loyalty to Pain, whom I can only presume is this illustrious leader, is a pressure point for him. We shall have to be careful of that. However, it also means that he will be completely devoted to this mission so as to please his lord." "Excellent. Brat, girl, speak." Fu stepped forward first. "I'm Fu, and I specialize in close to mid-range combat. My ninjutsu abilities lie in Doton and Futon, as well as Jinten, a combination of the two." A moment passed before Naruto stepped forward, unwilling to test Kakazu's temper. "My name's Naruto, and I'm mostly a mid-range ninjutsu specialist with Futon and Suton attacks. I've also got some Kenjutsu training for close combat." If Kakazu were a more expressive person, he probably would have exhibited a sense of pride in the fact that both his students had explained their abilities to a complete stranger without giving away any pertinent information, their Jinchuriki status or Naruto's Kinjutsu, for instance. However, as he was not that type of man, he quickly shoved that thought to the back of his mind before ordering Haro to tell them what he knew of the mission. "Not much," offered the cobalt-haired boy with a shrug. "I was just told to wait here by the plant guy until someone came." "Oh, the plant guy did say that we were to attend the Chunin exams as a Megakure shinobi," he added. That announcement caused Kakazu to frown. While he knew that they couldn't waltz into Konoha as they were, the idea that they would have to disguise themselves as Rain Ninja was not one he was looking forward to. Of course, his first student had already taken matters into his own hands. "Here," said Naruto, picking genin attire from the Omegakure section of clothes, "this looks like everything we'll need." He walked over to Haro and deposited a bunch of clothes into his arms, throwing another set at Fu. Kakazu eyed the blonde critically as he was given his own, rather large, bundle of ninja gear. "I guess that you have to wear this stuff, too, huh, Kakazu?" he mentioned. "Keep to your corners, or else," threatened the older ninja. He glared at Naruto, about to protest that there were no corners in the round cavern, until the blonde turned around. It wasn't a matter of being self-conscious, but if he had to don such a ridiculous outfit, he would do it without more comments about his strange body. The reveal of the mouth stitches during his battle with his students was plenty enough for now. 10 minutes later, all four were dressed in standard Amnin attire. Naruto and Haro wore an elbow-length gray shirt over a blue shirt, with a pale green scarf wrapped loosely around their necks. Dark blue pants with 4 light blue stripes along the sides ended in black ninja shoes. Each boy had a tan kunai pouch attached at the back of their pants, and their arms were wrapped from elbow to wrist in bandages. Lastly, both had donned the hideout of a megakur, a metal plate with 4 vertical lines sewn upon blue cloth. Haro wore his tilted and just off center of his forehead, and muttered quietly about how he missed his own, slashed-through mark, while Naruto had been forced by Kakazu to wear a full dark blue head covering. How many people in Konoha have bright yellow hair? Demanded the bounty hunter when Naruto whined, and would have to place a minor henge on to cover his whisker-like markings upon reaching Konoha. Fu was dressed in much the same fashion, wearing a red undershirt instead of blue and skin-tight pants that ended just above her knee. Her hideout was tied around her right bicep, and the red cylindrical object she always carried remained in place on her back. It took a strong amount of self-restraint for Naruto not to comment on Kakazu's current condition, considering the bounty hunter was never seen without his typical cloak, head covering, and mask. The former Taki Nin had been forced to wear a long-sleeved black shirt and pants, with Am's sea green, Jonin flak jacket over that. A dark blue material, a rain cloak, Naruto surmised, was draped over his shoulders and fell to his mid-forearm, the cloth open in the front for mobility. Like the genin, Kakazu had wrapped bandages around the rest of his forearms down to the wrist, and kept a brown kunai pouch attached to his pants at the back. In order to keep himself fully covered, he had also donned a full head covering with the Hidden Rain Village affiliation on it, as well as a complex-looking rebreather to hide the remainder of his facial features. "Get your supplies," he ordered gruffly, clearly unhappy with the way things were going. Naruto and Haro approached the kunai and shuriken crates, quickly loading their pouches with the weapons. Fu walked over to the wall of weapons and pulled several umbrellas from their perch, checking to make sure they were fully equipped with senbon. She placed those in the red case on her back, the handles up, and then filled her own weapons pouch with extra senbon. As Haro went to examine the weapons, she turned and flashed Kakazu a victorious grin. "Told ya I'd find a use for this thing." "Congratulations," he deadpanned, "it only took you a year to do so. Bring whatever food from here that you can carry. I refuse to waste any money on pampering you brats while we are within Konoha." "Ah, that's not necessary, Kakazu-san," interrupted Haro, walking toward him while strapping a pair of katana, each with 2 smaller, oppositely curved metal pieces, approximately 2 inches in length, one near the base, the second close to the tip, to his back. "Pain-sama has provided me with the funds we'll need in order to survive behind enemy lines." "Very well," conceded Kakazu after a moment. "Come, let us depart." He turned around and led the way out of the hideout, Naruto, Fu, and Haro following not far behind. The trip to the center of the Land of Fire, where the hidden leaf was located, was far more active than Fu would have expected. Haro, who had no previous biases about anyone in the group, remained noticeably silent, observing his new teammates with growing curiosity. However, the thrill of the Chunin exams had apparently instilled an even greater sense of mischief within Naruto than she had thought possible. "So we get to call you Kakazu-sensei now, right?" Naruto asked eagerly. He was a bit too enthusiastic with his questioning. In Fu's opinion, Kakazu already hated honorifics tacked upon his name, and being reminded of it, if the last 3 times were any indication, did not improve his increasingly sour mood. Wearing clothes he was uncomfortable with and being sent on a mission that he was not in control of seemed to shorten Kakazu's already dangerously short temper. She noticed Haro watching the scene play out from the corner of his eye. "No," Kakazu answered in a clipped tone. "Ah, come on." Naruto continued to egg, "We need it to solidify our team disguise." "No." Haro cleared his throat. "Actually, it would be practical to refer to you as our sensei, in order to not appear suspicious to any Konoha nin." Kakazu remained silent for a long moment, appearing to fight the urge to do something detrimental to the mission, like killing Haro or Naruto. "Only when we reach the village," he finally growled. They settled down that night in a large clearing Kakazu estimated to be 20 miles away from the village. The bounty hunter told his team that they would arrive sometime in the afternoon the next day. Haro and Fu merely nodded, but Naruto chirped, "Okay, Kakazu-sensei." Fu thought that, in the dead silence of the clearing, she could almost hear the final snap of Kakazu's frayed, hair-thin temper. Kakazu's arm detached, quicker than lightning, and grabbed a surprised Naruto around the neck. The blonde's arms flailed wildly as Kakazu dragged him closer. Black threads erupted from beneath the bandages over his wrist and wrapped themselves around Naruto's arms, binding them to his body. Haro took a step forward and began to withdraw his swords, but Fu placed a forceful hand on his shoulder and shook her head. Naruto needed to learn this lesson. The two watched as Kakazu brought Naruto right up to his face, the rebreather he was forced to wear the only thing separating the two. Listen well, brat, Kakazu hissed, his muffled voice coming out even lower and more dangerous than anyone present expected. I have tolerated your foolishness far longer than I should have, and this childish wordplay and immaturity will cease immediately. You should be grateful for the fact that we have embarked on a dangerous mission that we know next to nothing about, where you get all the benefits and I am forced to engage in a battle I might not be completely prepared for. He lowered his voice further, so Haro and Fu could no longer hear him. I never had intention of taking a pupil until I was confronted by you. Now, after steeping years of time and money into your tutoring, I expect you to act like the shinobi you have been raised to be. You are the carrier of Jiongu, a technique few alive have even heard of, you possess the chakra capacity and abilities of a powerful shinobi, and I have bestowed upon you the resources necessary to survive and thrive within this hell of a world. Must I resort to more drastic measures in order to drill home this lesson? Naruto had stopped struggling once Kakazu's diatribe had begun, and now he stared at the tall ninja with wide, blue eyes. You trained me, he asked reflexively, even as his mind traced the truth in his teacher's words. Shame began to flood his body, causing him to slump forward in defeat. He's right, Kakazu was the first person to ever treat me like I was a person rather than a piece of dirt. I owe him a lot, the least I can do is show him some respect. The best taught lessons come from personal investment without outside influence, Kakazu told him. When he noticed that Naruto seemed to understand his point, the black tendrils around his pupil loosened. I presume that you have learned your lesson. The blonde nodded slightly. Good. Now sufficiently calm, Kakazu started to place the boy down, but then seemed to think better of it. He pitched his arm back and then threw Naruto forward, releasing the blonde so he impacted headfirst into a tree 20 feet away. Ah, Kakazu-san, that doesn't seem like the way to treat your student. Kakazu scowled. Zetsu, I thought you had errands to run. This one ended up being the most prudent, replied Zetsu, stepping out from the tree and right over Naruto. You almost hit me with him, he whined. My apologies, Kakazu deadpanned. It appears that I will have to work on my aim in the future. Why are you here? We had to finalize plans for the passes which will allow you entry into the Konoha, the plant man said, handing Kakazu 4 slips of paper. We had some help acquiring those, he admitted. Naruto, pulling himself to his feet, glanced into the copse of trees behind him and caught sight of a blood-red pair of eyes before they melded into the darkness. Itachi, thought Naruto, turning his attention back to the conversation. Whatever needed to be said had apparently been said, though, for Zetsu immediately disappeared into the ground. Naruto thought he might have heard the plant man's lighter side laughing, at what, he didn't know, but brushed it off as a trick of his imagination. Your passes, Kakazu said, handing them each one of the slips of paper. On it was their respective headshot, along with their name, village affiliation, and the fact that they had permission to enter the Hidden Leaf for participation in the Chunin exams. Naruto looked at the name on his paper and frowned. Why is my name, Shinobu? His question prompted Fu into examining her own pass. The girl also frowned before looking over Haro's shoulder. The frown grew deeper. My name's Kazu, why does Haro get to keep his name? Kakazu pinched the spot between his eyebrows with his thumb and forefinger, massaging the growing headache and rage that he was still nursing from his tantrum with Naruto. It is possible that either of you might be recognized by name, or even appearance, disguises aside, during our stay in Konohagakure. I can only conclude that it was decided you would be forced to use aliases, just in case someone from your former villages recognize you. Haro is an unknown entity, and thus could keep his own name because there is no potential danger to the mission. My name has also been altered. He held up his own pass so they could see that he had been registered as IZO. Underneath that, he was identified as a Jonin instructor. I am no more pleased about it than you are, however, we must play the roles we are assigned, for now. He sighed, the breath coming out frustrated. Upon our arrival in Konoha, we shall use the names we have been given. You will refer to me as Izo Sensei. The bounty hunter almost spat the name, as if it were a curse. When he turned away and stalked into the nearby foliage muttering expletives, the three teammates took that as the cue that they were to go to sleep. The quartet was up and walking just after dawn the following day. Not long after noon, they arrived at the large, welcoming gates of the Hidden Leaf village. The Chunin guards at the gate asked them for their passports, checked the papers, and waved them through. Kakazu muttered something about lax security when they were out of earshot, and both Naruto and Fu forced themselves to hide the grins. The remainder of the day was slow. Kakazu followed a group of grass shinobi to the hotel that was designated for all incoming foreign ninja. As they walked through the city, the three children tried not to gape in awe at the sights, their heads turning every which way to better see the village. Kakazu went directly to his room upon reaching the hotel, closing and locking the door behind him. His three students collapsed upon their own beds, stripping off some of their more cumbersome clothing. The bounty hunter had kept them moving at a brisk pace all morning with almost no rest or food. Despite their training and stamina, the foreign clothes and the land of fire's humidity made for uncomfortable traveling conditions. Tired, and unwilling to press their luck in dealing with Kakazu, the three relaxed around their room until evening and then went to bed. When Naruto awoke the next day, it was to sunlight streaming in through a small slit in the window curtains, and not the standard kick from his teacher. He yawned loudly, opening bleary eyes to watch Fu step out of the bathroom in her rain ninja outfit. Haro's bed was empty, and the connecting door to Kakazu's room was open, presenting its emptiness as well. Scratching his head, he yawned once more, shooting Fu a confused look. Haro left to explore the city a little bit. Kakazu's working on gathering information about the exams for us, she explained. Ah, he responded, tongue and mind still thick with sleep. How about I shower and dress and then we go explore? Sounds good. It took half an hour for Naruto to prepare for the day, mostly due to the fact that he didn't want to wear the full head covering to hide his blonde hair. The pair wandered the village, taking more time than they had the previous day to observe its citizens and establishments. Naruto, who hadn't seen Konoha since he had left 7 years prior, found the walk quieter than he remembered. It took a moment to realize that the villagers, whom before would scowl, curse at him, and whisper about him, merely ignored him. He wasn't sure whether to view the lack of attention as a positive sign or not. He did find it strange that Kakazu's training seemed to have permanently embedded itself into his brain. When he and Fu passed a training field where a genin team was training with a tall, silver-haired man, a voice that sounded suspiciously like the bounty hunters whispered in his mind, Hitaki Kakashi, known as Kopi Ninja no Kakashi and Sharingan no Kakashi, rumored to have copied more than 1,000 ninjutsu techniques. Genin at 5, Chunin at 6, Jonin at 13, an Anbu member for several years afterwards, he possesses extraordinary insight and analytical abilities, and has a claim on his head in almost every nation. He is worth 80 million ryo. Naruto shook his head to clear the string of information from it. While useful, he, and to a more worrying extent, Kakazu, couldn't bounty hunt within Konoha's walls without giving away their underlying purpose for being there. A growl of frustration ripped from his throat when they passed another team standing outside a barbecue restaurant, the voice murmuring, Sarutobi Asuma, son of the Sandaime Hokage, former member of the 12 Guardian Ninja, Futon Affinity. His head is worth 35 million ryo. After another 3 internal monologues of people he recognized from the bingo book, Naruto quit fighting the feeling. He supposed that, once they were outside the city's walls, his ability to remember such important information would prove invaluable, though it was a little annoying right now. It was only after eating a hearty lunch at Ichiraku Ramen that Naruto's bingo book sense came across a peculiarity. Fu nudged him when he stopped in the middle of the road, eyes set on a far-off figure that appeared to be walking towards them on its hands. As the person neared, Naruto identified him, for the person was definitely masculine, as possessing a horrible bowl cut of black hair set over thick black eyebrows, wearing a solid green spandex jumpsuit and orange leguamas. Maito guy, taijutsu specialist, began the voice, but as it blathered on and the person neared, Naruto's own thought of, I thought he'd be taller, surfaced. The blonde didn't even seem to register the fact that Maito guy had come within speaking distance of him and Fu. Yosh! Cried the hand walker. Excuse me, Amnin-san, but you appear to be blocking my path. He jumped to his feet, bowing low. I assume you are here for the Chunin exams. Is there something I can help you with? Are you Mito guy? Naruto asked impulsively. The green-clad boy's eyes immediately overflowed with tears. Yosh. Guy-sensei's legacy has spread even to the water-logged fields of Omegakure. I am proud to hear that his accomplishments have gone so far. One of Naruto's eyebrows started twitching, and Fu felt a large sweat drop rolling down the side of her face. Alas, I fear you have made a mistake. My name is Rock Lee, and I am Konoha's beautiful green beast. And who are you? Shinobu, corrected the blonde, shooting Fu a grateful glance for catching his mistake. He rubbed his ribs where she had nudged him, perhaps a little stronger than necessary. Kazu, added Fu, inclining her head slightly. We'd better be on our way. It was nice to meet you, Rock Lee. You as well, Kazu and Shinobu of Omegakure, shouted Lee exuberantly. May your springtime of youth never fade. Lee then flipped over onto his hands and continued his walk through the village, the two Jinchuriki watching him go. He's strange, commented Fu at length. Naruto could only nod mutely. Discovering the peculiarity of the genin of the hidden leaf was the first strange incident of the day. Naruto could safely say he was glad he had gotten out of the village before he had been infected with whatever turned normal ninja into that. Lee was someone to watch out for, though, in the ninja world, the stronger a shinobi was, the more peculiarities he had to compensate for the types of missions he went on. Kakazu and Kisame, at the very least, fit into that stereotype extremely well. The second problem the two Jinchuriki encountered that day came in the form of three sand ninja they ran into on the way back to the hotel. The tallest of the three was a male wearing a full black bodysuit with a black hood and purple face paint, and possessed a bulky, bandaged package on his back. His female companion wore her dirty blonde hair in 4 pigtails in the back, along with a pale lavender outfit and fishnet stockings, and wielded a giant battle fan. However, it was the third, shortest member of the trio that ended up causing the problem. He possessed hair the color of dried blood and skin the same hue as Haro's. His clothing consisted of a black bodysuit shorter than the other boys, the sleeves going only halfway down his biceps. From the edge of the sleeves to just above the elbow he wore fishnet. A long white sash hung over his right shoulder and crossed his body to his left hip, the loose ends of the sash moving in the breeze. From his left shoulder to the other hip crossed a brown, leather band, similar to Kisame's, Naruto noted, with multiple buckles. Connected to the leather was a large gourd with black markings on it. Black sandals covered his feet, and bandages were wrapped around his ankles. A tattoo with the kanji for love was imprinted upon his forehead, and dead teal eyes peered out from within black-rimmed sockets. The red-haired male stopped suddenly when they were about to cross paths with Naruto and Fu, causing his two teammates to stop as well. He stared at the pair intently for a solid 30 seconds before Fu groaned and clutched her stomach in pain. "Shukaku," buzzed a voice in her head before lapsing into silence. "You," spoke the redhead with a voice as dry as the desert. Naruto wasn't sure whether the boy was talking to himself or Fu, but hearing him say the single word gave him the creeps. It was like talking to Itachi, only his own age. "You're like me." His teal eyes were focused on Fu, and Naruto became distinctly uncomfortable with the gaze on his friend. The boy's two teammates also seemed rather nervous at the initiation of conversation. "I will kill you to validate my existence," he finished. Naruto gulped. The way he said it, the proclamation was a fact, like if Kakazu walked up to him and said, "I like money." He'd never met an individual so prepossessed with surety. Naruto's fists clenched, and he stepped forward slightly in order to partially shield Fu from view. "You can try," he uttered with more confidence than he felt, "but you won't succeed." Not a flicker of emotion passed over the other boy's face. "You have a strong will," he said after a moment, "but that will not be enough to save you. Or her. When we meet in the Chunin exams, you will die." His piece said, the redhead and his two teammates continued on their way. When they passed Naruto, the blonde felt a stirring in his mind, as if something in there was restless. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to calm the unease he felt in his body. "Sabaku no Gaara," answered the redhead. "You and your Amnin brethren will satisfy mother." Naruto didn't have anything to say in response, and Sagara and his two teammates walked on, the blonde's bright blue eyes on him until they disappeared around a corner. "Come on," Naruto prodded, helping the recovering Fu get to her feet. "Let's get back to the hotel and tell Ka, Izo-sensei about our new friend." Together they managed to get back to their room without any more distractions, the green-haired girl recovering from her brief bout of pain just inside the front doors. Upon reaching their room, Naruto noticed that neither Kakazu nor Haro had returned. He guided his companion to her bed and helped her sit down, despite protests that she was fine. Naruto sat down across from her and eyed her speculatively. What was that? I'm guessing an insane genin native to Suna, Fu replied snippily. Naruto shot her a look. Not him, you. What was with the sudden stomach pain? He clarified. There was a brief pause before he slowly added, come to think of it, you had the same reaction when we met. Fu shrugged. The beetle likes to talk to me sometimes. The bee, I have an idea, Naruto broke off. He settled himself into a cross-legged position, holding out his hands palms down. Grab my hands and close your eyes, he ordered. She complied, clasping their hands together and allowing her eyelids to flutter shut. Naruto closed his own eyes and evened out his breathing, settling into a meditation technique that Kisame had taught him early on in their training. The blonde had visited his Mindscape once before, after falling unconscious upon his summoning of the chameleon boss. Then it had been an accident, a byproduct of chakra loss and exhaustion. This time, he was attempting to accomplish an even more daring feat, entering his Mindscape intentionally, and also bringing someone with him. After several minutes, Naruto opened his eyes. He was ankle-deep in sewer water, hands clasped firmly with Fu's. Hey, he whispered, we're here. The green-haired girl opened her orange orbs, gazing around in a mixture of awe and disgust. They stood in the sewer water that she assumed was indicative of Naruto's Mindscape. Over Naruto's shoulder she could see a field of wilted flowers, the sign of her own Mindscape. About 200 feet beyond her lay a series of honey-colored bars set up in a beehive shape. Held within the cage was a huge creature, possessing a blue upper body with a thick carapace, under which were set 6 multi-jointed limbs, each ending in a green, serrated hand. Large, horn-like extensions jutted forth from each shoulder, its head, and its upper and middle back. A pair of wickedly sharp mandibles was connected to a helmet-like structure which hid the creature's eyes. The creature's thorax was colored a bright green, separating into 7 tail-like appendages, 6 of which had red, orange, and yellow wings sprouting from them. Fu scowled. This was the home of her Biju, the 7-tailed horned beetle which had made her life miserable for as long as she could remember. Fu, QB, he buzzed, his raspy voice turning angrier at the second name. QB, thought Fu, confused. Then she heard the roar. Release me from this prison, you worthless sack of flesh. Wide-eyed, Fu whipped around and laid claim to the sight of a giant, larger than the Nanabe, 9-tailed fox, with a red-orange pelt and cruel, intelligent, blood-red eyes, held beyond jail cell bars. The fox raised one giant paw and crashed it through the gate, coming within 10 feet of the Jinchuriki's position. Damn this seal. Damn the Yondaime Hokage. I would rip you to shreds if it weren't for this accursed seal, he growled, frustrated. Naruto stepped in front of Fu, as if to shield her from the QB. The movement also afforded Fu the opportunity to avert her eyes without appearing weak. Something to the right caught her attention, and she focused upon it while Naruto had a staring contest with the Biju within him. Out of her periphery, she had absently noticed that the area to her left seemed to be an endless expanse of hallway. To the right, about 15 feet after the caged bars ended, was a mass of black threads that spanned the entire hallway, completely obstructing the path. Thick strands branched out and connected to the wall, ceiling, and floor, stabilizing the entire web-like structure. In the center of the web were 2 masks, one with blue markings in the shape of a hippo, the second a bear mask with red designs. The strange web design, Fu guessed, was probably representative of Naruto's Jiongu ability. Etched in the foot of stone at the top of the hallway were crude pictures of chameleons, the internal representation of Naruto's connection to the chameleon summoning contract. The female Jinchuriki refocused her attention on Naruto and the QB in time to hear the beast growl, "What do you want from me, child? I have little reason or motivation to grant you assistance, unless I am somehow benefited by it. And why is the fly here?" "I am no fly," rasped the Nanabe, whipping its non-winged tail through its cage and producing a thunderous crack against the ground. "I am the Nanabi no Kabutomushi, bringer of dust storms and whirlwinds, capable of disintegrating anything that gets caught in my winds. I ravaged the plains of Iwagakure while the tale of your capture spread to our remaining brethren. I am the third most powerful Biju in existence, and I will not be demeaned by even you, you cursed Kitsune. Bristled the seven tails. A low, throaty sound emerged from the Kyuubi, and it took both Jinchuriki a moment to realize the giant fox was chuckling. If those are your boasts, you are more pathetic than I remember. Get this dust mite out of my sight, child, demanded the nine tails. No, Naruto responded stubbornly, we need to talk to both of you. This is the most convenient way to do so. What makes you think that either I or the butterfly over there will give you any information? Kyuubi snarled. I am not a butterfly. What? Shukaku, interrupted Fu. The two bickering demons fell silent at the question. When we came across that Gaara guy, you said, Shukaku, she stated slowly, turning to face her Biju. What? Shukaku. I want to know if it's a threat to our mission. Both Biju began to laugh, Kyuubi's deep and sinister, Nanabe's raspy and grating. Shukaku is hardly a threat, the fox chuckled. That runt may pose a challenge to you mere mortals, but to us, Shukaku is nothing. Shukaku is the weakest of us all, agreed the beetle. Naruto raised an eyebrow. Of us all, he repeated. Shukaku's a Biju. Fu slammed one fist into the other palm. Of course, she cried. Gaara said that I'm just like him, he's a Jinchuriki, too. This, Gaara, he is from Sunagakure. The two children nodded. Then his being the host of Shukaku does not surprise me. Suna has kept a tight grasp on Shukaku since the fool's initial capture. As they should, buzzed Nanabe in agreement. Our sibling, ICHIBI no Shukaku, is the most claim to fame Suna has had since its formation. It and the puppeteer Chikamatsumonzaemon, and no mere human can compare to the power of a Biju. Gaara's also a Jinchuriki, pondered Fu. We'll have to watch out for him. Naruto nodded his agreement. But why did he only sense your Biju? He asked, turning to face his companion. She didn't have an answer for him. The seal, growled the Kyuubi. The fourth Hokage created a unique and powerful seal to contain me, one that had never before been used. As long as I hold no influence over you, I am undetectable by most everyone. Only the Hachibi and this annoying insect have the power or ability to sense my presence in this state. The fox gestured with his large head in the direction of the seven tails across from it. I sense that wasn't a compliment, rasped the Nanabe. The Kyuubi snorted in reply, but the beetle ignored it. As Fu knows well, the seal that binds me to her is a weaker one, capable of containment and preventing some measure of my influence. However, I retain a certain amount of power, the ability to sense the other Biju, and communication abilities with my host. Not that I like to take advantage of that little ability, Fu replied dryly. Whether you like it or not, the ease with which we talk has come in handy. Certainly the side effects are entertaining to witness. Fu clutched her stomach in memory of the phantom pain she had experienced prior, the pain she felt whenever her tailed beast conversed with her. And then Fu and the seven tails disappeared from view. The Kyuubi was soon to follow. I apologize for putting an end to this rather heartfelt display of affection, spoke a new voice, sounding completely unsympathetic. Naruto groaned. He could recognize the dry, cynical tone of Kakazu even in his sleep. It wasn't affection, protested Naruto, cracking his stiff neck. He suddenly noticed Haro standing beside his teacher, meditating to help compile what we know about the exams. Kakazu's facial expression didn't seem to change, but Naruto identified skepticism and curiosity within the even stare the tall ninja leveled him with. Call it what you will, brat, responded Kakazu, choosing not to probe just yet. The bounty hunter then proceeded to tell his three students about what he'd uncovered during the day, that the Chunin exams consisted of 3 parts, the first was some form of written test, the second a survival portion, and the third a tournament between competitors. I have exhausted my patience with collecting intelligence for you, he said when finished, and as such, I have no desire to assist you anymore. He seemed to believe they could interpret the unspoken threat, for he turned on his heel and walked into his room, slamming the door behind him. The 3 children could only exchange looks and shrug. After Haro left the room the next morning, Naruto knocked lightly on Kakazu's door. The bounty hunter growled, "What?" from inside his conclave. Naruto gulped and hesitated before answering. Can we talk? When there was no response, Naruto chose to take the silence as a yes. He opened the door slowly, using it as a shield in case he had misinterpreted his teacher's intentions. Your meditation, Kakazu began once Naruto had closed the door, was what I presume to be a conversation with your Biju. Naruto bobbed his head in affirmation. Speak. Naruto remained standing, telling Kakazu about his and Fu's confrontation with Sabaku no Gaara, the ensuing talk with the Kyuubi and the Nanabi, and the deduction that Gaara was the container of another tailed beast. Once his tale was done, Naruto watched Kakazu silently mull over the information. Finally, the tall ninja said, our employer informed me that there would be another Jinchuriki present in the exams, but I admit that I was not told any other information beyond that. However, he is not your objective. You are to get as far as possible in the exams to make my movements around the village inconspicuous and give us as much access to Konoha as possible. Avoid this Gaara child if possible, lest you slip up and reveal more of your abilities than strictly necessary. Realizing that his teacher was done talking, Naruto nodded in understanding before leaving the room and going to rejoin Fu to pass on the message. LLL. The days until the Chunin exams began seemed to drag on, but after what felt like forever, Naruto found himself walking through the village with Fu and Haro at his side. They arrived at Konoha's Ninja Academy and were soon caught up in the swarm of students gathered outside room 301. What's going on? Naruto whispered to Fu, who was the tallest on their team. We only came up one flight of stairs. Fu stood on tiptoe to get a better view. Two ninja are guarding the entrance. They just kicked that Rock Lee kid away, and some other girl, too, she added after a moment. We should wait for someone else to notice, Haro advised quietly, so as to not give away our skill level. Naruto remembered Kakazu's words about avoiding Gaara to keep their power hidden and nodded his agreement. It only took 10 seconds before a raven-haired boy in blue stepped forward. I will pass, he declared, once you remove that illusion you've placed on the doorway. Muted whispering followed this announcement, partially muffling the boy's baton pass to a pink-haired girl, who took over the explanation of why the scene was an illusion. The sign above the door morphed before the crowd's eyes to read, 201 feet. Naruto nodded his head towards the door. Let's go, he said, weaving through the throng of genin. He and his two teammates went through the hallway as Rock Lee and his teammates fell into an argument with the raven-haired kid and his pink-haired teammate. Well, that's one obstacle avoided, Naruto observed. They entered a large room filled with long benches and Chunin hopefuls. Naruto glanced around, just as Kakazu had said, genin from the leaf, sand, grass, rain, and waterfall were present in varying quantities, as well as what appeared to be a single team with the strange musical note headbands. The blonde wanted to say something, but Fu had taken to trying to hide herself and Haro's gaze was half-lidded with boredom. What are you doing? He demanded quietly of Fu. You've been gone from your home village for a long time, she whispered fiercely, and with your outfit, the odds of them recognizing you are slim. I've only been gone from Taki for a year, and my outfit isn't nearly as concealing as yours. Okay, I see your point, but you're making yourself stand out more by trying to be inconspicuous. He retorted. The Nanabi Jinchuriki straightened herself slightly, but continued to use Naruto as a shield. The blonde sighed at his friend's antics, but chose to ignore her and scanned the room instead, noting that Lee and his team had entered the room. Sasuke-kun, squealed a girl in a purple top and skirt outfit with platinum blonde hair. She leaped onto the back of the raven-haired boy, who had entered the room with his team behind Lee, and hooked her arms around his neck. While flames seemed to erupt in the eyes of the pink-haired girl, two more boys meandered through the crowd towards the ensuing argument. Just like the day he and Fu met Rock Lee and Sabaku no Gaara, Naruto's mind instantly snapped to bingo book mode, except this time, the voice that sounded like Kakazu spoke about identities rather than numbers. The platinum blonde was a Yamanaka, one of the members of Sarutobi Asuma's team and part of a family proficient in mental manipulations. The two boys who had approached the group, one with hair tied up in a style reminiscent of a pineapple, the other a somewhat chubby lad munching on chips, were her two teammates, a Nara and an Akamaki, respectively. Nara clan members were notorious for their mastery over shadows, and the Akamaki were able to manipulate the sizes of their body and body part to do battle. If the boy that the Yamanaka was fawning over really was Sasuke-kun, then he was the last, loyal member of the prominent Uchiha clan, and one of Hatake Kakashi's students. From what he had read and learned from Kakazu and Ryo, the Uchiha were to be respected for their skill and Kekkei Genkai, the Sharingan. Even as a genin, he would have to be watched out for. His two teammates, the pink-haired girl with emerald green eyes and a pale-skinned, black-haired boy in black, who bore a passing resemblance to the Uchiha, Naruto noticed, didn't bear any noticeable clan markings or attributes that Naruto could pinpoint as belonging to a specific clan. A third team approached, all of its members identifiable. The female had the dark hair and pale, lavender eyes of the legendary Hyuga, renowned worldwide for the unique taijutsu style. Next to her stood a brunette with the red, fang-like facial markings of the Inuzuka. The small white dog sitting atop his head confirmed his affiliation. Their third teammate wore a long overcoat, much like Kakazu, and dark sunglasses typical of the several aberrame pictured in the bingo book. Naruto's eyes found Lee's green jumpsuit in the crowd and noted the Hyuga features of Lee's male teammate. Though this one seemed more haughty and arrogant than the female, she wore a pink shirt and possessed hair styled in two buns atop her head. Like Sasuke's two teammates and Lee, she had no recognizable clan features. Naruto could only assume that the entire team was well versed in taijutsu, since their instructor was the famed Maito guy. The blonde was pulled from his thoughts as the door slammed open, revealing a tall, blocky man with two large scars across his face. Similar to Naruto, he wore a hate that fully covered his head, and the blonde was forced to wonder what he was hiding underneath. He scratched at the head covering in irritation of the reminder that he had to remain disguised. Silence, maggots, barked the newcomer, a group of grey-suited ninja filing in behind him. My name is Morino Ibiki, and I am the proctor for the first exam. If you'll all turn in your applications and take a number, you can find your corresponding seat and we can get started with the written test. Several groans greeted this announcement, but all the Chunin hopefuls formed lines and exchanged applications for numbers. It took a while, but soon enough, Naruto found himself seated on the right side of the room, in a seat with a random Konoha nin to his left and the Hyuga girl to his right. From the corner of his eye, he caught her twiddling her fingers nervously, but chose to ignore her in favor of looking for his teammates. Fu sat 4 rows in front of him, and 3 seats to the right. Haro was on the left side of the room, 1 row in front of him and 2 seats from the left wall. Ibiki began speaking again, his tone gruff and no nonsense. Listen carefully, maggots. There are several rules to this exam, and I'm not going to repeat them or take any questions. Now, each person begins with 10 points, and each question on the test is worth 1 point. If you get all the questions right, you keep your 10 points. If you get 3 questions wrong, your score is 7 points. Second, you will be scored as a team. If anyone on the team receives a 0, the entire team will fail. Third, if any of the proctors catch you cheating, you'll lose 2 points for each occurrence, meaning that if you're caught 5 times, you will fail this exam, he enunciated carefully. He allowed a brief silence to fall over the crowd of genin in order to allow them to digest this information before continuing. The 10th question will be given 45 minutes after the exam has started. You have an hour to complete the exam. Ibiki gazed around the room, eyes hard as diamonds. Begin. There was a rustle as the genin all flipped over their papers, the scribbling of pencils against parchment sounding from only a couple of ninja. Naruto scrutinized the paper carefully, skimming over the 9 questions. He scowled after taking a minute to read through the questions. All of them seemed ridiculously difficult, though Naruto supposed that was probably the point. Shrugging slightly, the undercover genin focused his attention on the first question, an encryption. Fortunately, Kakazu had taught him the logic behind decoding ciphers, and he quickly went to work. LLL. Fu sat at her desk, thinking. She had answered the 6th question, one regarding economics and the best way to regulate funds for a mission in a strange area. She was sure Kakazu would have her head if she missed that one, when she realized how ridiculous the test was. She had only been able to answer that question because of rigorous training under Kakazu, and she knew that no one else had undergone the same regimen she, and to a greater extent, Naruto, had. Unlike Naruto, who had no experience of a hidden village's academy program, Fu had some idea of what was taught in school. Questions of this magnitude had little to no chance of being answered by mere genin. Cheating violations were also punished much harsher in school than in the rules the proctor had set forth. The only explanation was that the test required the genin to cheat in order to get the answers. She tapped her pencil against her paper repetitively, using the monotony of the sound to concentrate. Naruto was reasonably intelligent and would be able to solve some of the questions. Haro seemed to be smart enough, but there were better methods to pass the test. There were few occasions where Fu was grateful to be the container to the seven-tailed horned beetle. This was one of them. The Nanabe's abilities allowed her to manipulate dust on any scale, and the convenient thing about that was that dust particles existed in minute amounts in the air. She twirled the pencil in her hand, collecting a small, barely visible cloud of dust around the tip, then sent it out. Her target was the male genin at the end of her row, in the aisle seat. His hand had not stopped moving since Ibiki had called for the test to begin. 15 minutes passed, during which Fu stared steadfastly at her paper, trying to see if there was anything else she could solve. Once she had allowed the quarter of an hour to pass, she recalled the dust to her. It settled on her paper in a layer thick enough to read the male genin's writing. Fu scribbled down the answers and then collected more dust to her, allowing it to settle around the shallow markings her pencil lead had made. The green-haired girl sent the two dust clouds flying surreptitiously towards Naruto and Haro. Imbued with her chakra, they would settle on her teammates' papers and give them all the answers. Fu looked up at the clock. 35 minutes had passed since the start of the test. She could only pray that when the 10th question was delivered in 10 minutes, there would be no other game-changing rules alongside it. LLL. Naruto looked up at the clock and frowned. 10 minutes before the 10th question, and he had managed to answer two more questions, one about economics. Kakazu would have killed him for missing that, he thought, unknowingly echoing Fu's sentiment, and another about the founding history of the 5 great shinobi nations. An obscene amount of dust seemed to settle on his paper. Frustrated, he blew it away and glared at his test. The dust particles coalesced onto the test again, and he blew them away for a second time. When the dust came back for a third time, Naruto remembered that Fu's biju allowed her control over the substance. This time, he allowed the dust to form a film on his paper, spelling out the answers to the questions in Fu's neat scrawl. Taking advantage of his friend's skill, Naruto went to work copying the answers and eventually finished with only a couple of minutes to spare. He breathed a mental sigh of relief, turned over his paper, and linked his fingers together, stretching them out and cracking the knuckles. The blonde took the moment to eye the room. While he had been writing answers, a good chunk of ninja had failed the exam. Naruto counted at least 10 teams absent. Ibiki stepped forward after another minute, announcing, "Before the 10th question is distributed, there is a stipulation." When he had everyone's attention, he continued, "You have a choice in whether or not you want to take the 10th question. If you choose not to take it, you and your teammates will fail, immediately. However, if you take it and get it wrong, you will be permanently banned from participating in the Chunin exams ever again." He was immediately interrupted by the Inuzuka. "What kinda crap is that?" demanded the brunette, getting to his seat and pointing at Ibiki. "There are people here who've taken the Chunin exams before." The proctor let out a bark of laughter. "I wasn't the proctor for those tests. Now that I'm in charge, the rules have changed. If you choose to take this question and fail, you will remain a genin forever. If you don't want to take the question, raise your hand and one of the examiners will take down your number. Then you and your teammates are free to leave." Silence reigned for several seconds before the first trembling hand rose into the air. The Konoha nin next to Naruto rose slowly. "I quit. I can't take it," he shouted. One of the Chunin examiners scribbled something on his sheet of paper. "Numbers 111 and 130, you fail alongside number 50. That one action was like a catalyst. Hands from all over the room shot up, and numbers were methodically called out, alongside the words, "You fail. Please leave the room." Then, the unthinkable happened. Naruto, bored with the proceedings, yawned. Ibiki's gaze snapped over to the blonde in the blink of an eye. "Do you find this boring, Amnin?" the proctor queried with false patience. Naruto supposed that, in his own way, Ibiki was a rather scary individual. The only problem was that Naruto had been raised by Kakazu and, to a shorter extent, Kisame, both of whom were hardcore, S-class missing nin who believed in intimidation and lessons filled with pain above all else. Compared to them, Morino Ibiki was like a fledgling bird just learning to fly. "Honestly, yes," he replied in a bored tone. "I'm sure on some level your threat is meant to be scary, but I'm just not buying it. Sorry for interrupting your fun, but if we could get on with this, I would really appreciate it." If Ibiki was surprised by Naruto's response, he didn't show it. His stony face scanned the room, trying to intimidate anyone else into leaving, but all the genin, even some of the weaker ones, stood the ground. "Cocky kid," he thought. Congratulations. All of you in this room have passed the first portion of the Chunin exams. What about the 10th question? Someone asked. Naruto turned around and spied the Uchiha's pink-haired teammate with her hands planted squarely on the bench. Ibiki smiled, causing the blonde to shudder. Certain people should not be allowed to do that. There was no 10th question. Or, if you prefer, choosing to stay or leave was the 10th question. Naruto ignored Ibiki's explanation regarding the first 9 questions, the importance of information on missions, and how false information could drastically hurt a village. He perked up slightly when Ibiki took off his head covering, revealing burn marks and screw holes, signs of torture from missions past, but went back to zoning out when Ibiki continued his diatribe. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki was brought back to wakefulness by the sounding of shattering glass. A large bundle had come through one of the windows and was currently in the process of unrolling. Standing in front of a large banner which read, "Second Examiner, Mitarashi Anko is here," was a purple-haired woman in an open, tan trench coat, wearing mostly fishnet for clothing. "I am the second examiner, Mitarashi Anko," she announced needlessly. "Let's go to the next exam. Follow me." Naruto leaped from one tree branch to the next, Haro and Fu not far behind. The second round of the Chunin exams had begun only 3 hours before, and so far the team had simply ventured deeper into the forest, not a word exchanged among the three. The premise of this phase was rather simple. Mitarashi Anko, the arguably insane second proctor of the Chunin exams, had told the remaining teams that each of them would receive one of 2 scrolls, heaven or earth. Starting from separate gates, the teams would then enter training ground 44, otherwise known as the Forest of Death. To pass the second round, it was necessary to arrive at the castle in the center of the forest with both scrolls, meaning that they would have to intercept another team and take its scroll. It wasn't really a problem, of course. The probability that any team they ran into would have the scroll they needed was 50-50, so the plan of attack was to simply find a team, take it out, check the scroll, and hope that it was the opposite of what they were carrying. Naruto wondered if the exam could really be any simpler. Yes, the whole idea was theoretically a test of teamwork and strength, but Naruto and Fu had both undergone training with Kakazu, an S-class missing nin. And Haro had apparently been brought up under the guidance of some great leader whom even Kakazu seemed to know something of, if not grudgingly respected. The real issue puzzling Naruto was what they were doing in the Chunin exams in the first place. He wasn't complaining. The exams did present a great opportunity to observe the hidden leaf denizens and defenses for his eventual vengeance. But Kakazu had proven time and again that he was not a man to go back on his word, which meant that the blue-haired woman in the Akatsuki cloak had somehow convinced him to bring the 2 Jinchuriki to Konoha. By that logic, Kakazu was taking orders from Akatsuki, though the reason why escaped him. When the blonde had angered Kakazu on the trek to the hidden leaf, the bounty hunter had briefly mentioned a battle he wasn't prepared for. That was intriguing in of itself. Kakazu was a very analytical, and arrogant, ninja, choosing bounties and chasing them only after either coming up with a solid strategy or realizing that their skills didn't even merit having one. To have agreed to a mission where he didn't yet have a plan meant that the former Taki-nin was either coerced into doing so, something Naruto found hard to believe, considering his teacher's personality, or there was some huge sum of money on the line, which equated to a very powerful target. Naruto didn't particularly care for being left in the dark. If Kakazu needed him and Fu, and Haro, he supposed, to remain in the Chunin exams, the blonde wanted to know why. Of course, the odds of him getting the answer were relatively slim, but he'd be damned if he didn't at least try. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki was brought from his internal musings as Fu shouted, "Hey!" He turned his head in time to see Haro peel off from the group on a separate trajectory. Scowling, he motioned for Fu to follow him as he twisted on his heel and took off after the rain shinobi. In Naruto's opinion, Haro was a wild card. Even if the blonde didn't know what their exact mission was, he knew that he could rely on Fu simply because of the shared history. Haro had been trained by a completely different entity, held no formal allegiance to Kakazu or either of his pupils, and possessed an unknown personality. Sure, he had explained his abilities, but even those didn't really tell his 2 teammates his skill level, or how he'd react in the face of danger, or any one of a dozen other situations Naruto could come up with, given the time. This situation, for instance. The 2 Jinchuriki found Haro crouched on a tree branch overlooking a small camp. The tips of his 2 katana bit into the bark of the flora and his arms were folded over the hilts, making him appear quite relaxed. Both Jinchuriki landed on the same bow, one on either side of him. Haro didn't even flinch. What are you doing? Naruto whispered fiercely. Haro turned surprisingly serious gray eyes on the blonde. Look, was all he said. Naruto complied. Far below them were 3 genin, all wearing yellow outfits reminiscent of straitjackets with large X stitches all down the front of their uniforms. 2 of them, one with only one eye visible, the other completely blindfolded, were tending to a third teammate who bore slight burns, the only member who could see from both eyes. Privately, Naruto wondered how smart an idea it was to have only 3 working eyes out of a total of 6, but then he disregarded the anomaly. Naruto couldn't see the symbol on their headbands signifying village affiliation from his position, but the rebreathers all of them wore meant that they were most likely from the hidden rain. Fu apparently noticed, too. 3 genin from a Megacure, she observed. One looks injured. What's the big deal? Haro shot her a look of disdain. They are Amnin. Hanzo's Amnin. Naruto caught Fu's eyes behind their teammate's back and shrugged, clearly not understanding the cobalt-haired boy's point. Haro apparently noticed Fu's confusion and elaborated, Hanzo is Pain-sama's sworn enemy, the cause of all the strife within a Megacure. Any of his underlings are therefore the enemy of Pain-sama and must be eliminated. Naruto stared at the back of the boy's head. They're only genin, he pointed out, hardly a threat to your cause. Our forces are small as it is, Haro defended through gritted teeth. Whether genin or jonin, they are opposing the path to peace within my home country, and thus must be removed before they can do more harm. No. The Amnin stared at Naruto, his face suddenly blank. Don't tell me that you're opposed to killing, he stated flatly. Fu snorted. Hardly, she muttered. Naruto shook his head. Anko had explained that killing was allowed, practically expected, within the forest of death, whether by wildlife or opposing teams. All the participants had been forced to sign waivers acknowledging the fact that they could die while within training ground 44, though the capacity for most genin to commit such a cold-blooded feat was rather small. Then again, Naruto and his team were hardly most genin. The blonde had killed before, but even considering the limited experience he had with killing people himself, Kakazu had made sure that he'd become desensitized enough to death to deal with his new profession as a bounty hunter. And therein was the hitch. Kakazu had taught Naruto that living a successful life meant having the money to afford the necessities, that money made the world go around. To get money, as a missing nin anyway, one had to kill and collect the bounties placed on the heads of other ninja. But in doing so, the killing had a purpose, an intended goal that led to the improvement of one's lifestyle. The type of killing that Haro was proposing, it was senseless. At least, senseless to Naruto, whose instructions were to get through the Chunin exams without drawing attention to himself. There was no connection between taking out the team of hidden rain genin below them and staying under Konoha's radar. He'd learned that while a person's cost of living was intertwined with others' lives, his was dependent upon the blood he shed by cutting down said others. The divergence from Kakazu's teachings was somewhat stark, for the bounty hunter frequently killed either for the thrill or as a therapeutic tool, but Naruto was glad for the difference. Kami forbid he ever turn into a carbon copy of the former Taki Nin. Which brought him back to the issue at hand. Haro wasn't going to let the matter of the rain team below pass easily. Naruto was uncomfortable with the prospect of killing the genin for no reason other than because they were Haro's enemy, but on the other hand, they did need a scroll with which to pass the second stage of the exams. We need a scroll, but no killing. He warned Haro. You said you had orders to obey Izo-sensei, he corrected hastily. Well right now, I'm in charge, so you have to listen to me. We're not going out of our way to make trouble. Haro scowled, but reluctantly nodded his acceptance. Naruto shared a nod with Fu before both of them leapt in opposite directions. The cobalt-haired boy stood, pulling his twin swords from the tree branch. The weapons weren't his, but out of all of Pain's followers, it was he who had the capacity to use them best. Apparently, one of the higher members, a Hoshigaki Kisame, had tracked down some former member of the Mist 7 Shinobi swordsmen and killed him, collecting the money on his head and adding the legendary Thunder Fangs to the rebels' collection of supplies. Being one of the few lightning users within Pain's ranks, the Amnin had instantly been drawn to the swords and had devoted much of his free time learning to use them efficiently. However, Haro had 2 unfortunate problems. The first was that he had limited to no formal kenjutsu training, so he could only use the swords effectively as a means of channeling and utilizing lightning, both chakra-natured and real, though he hadn't tried the latter yet. Kisame had taken the time to inform him of several of the lightning techniques the sword's previous owner had used. He had also handed him a scroll detailing all of said techniques, that he had apparently pilfered from the owner's hideout, but that was as far as his swordsmanship training with the Thunder Fangs went. The bigger issue was that Haro had smaller than average chakra reserves, which, combined with the fact that Reitan was more chakra intensive than the other elements, meant that he tended to lose stamina quicker than he should have. It was a problem he continued to try to rectify by expanding his reserves, but even still, he knew they could be larger. Still, Haro was willing to make exceptions in certain, extenuating circumstances. Vengeance for the pain Hanzo had caused him seemed like a good reason to expend a bit of energy. Enough time had passed for Fu and Naruto to get into position. Time to get started then, he decided. Lightning crackled around the hilts of the blades, and when Haro felt like he had accumulated enough chakra, he threw the blades into the ground on the edge of the campsite. Electricity sparked across the ground in random arrays, heading towards all three genin as Haro shouted, "Raiso, Ikazushi no utage." The two ninja who were uninjured jumped away from the attack, while the one who was lying on the ground was forced to take the ninjutsu, his body dancing as it surged with voltage. Per Naruto's instruction, Haro had, grudgingly, toned down the power so that the technique only knocked out the target instead of killing him. There was a clang of metal on metal as Naruto burst forth from his hiding spot and attacked the blindfolded genin with his wakizashi, hitting a hastily drawn kunai. Apparently being blindfolded didn't hinder the enemy's sight, though it proved to be a moot point. Either the rain genin had no skill with close combat, or the element of surprise was much more effective than Haro estimated, for Naruto took him out with a swift taijutsu swordplay combo. Both boys looked for the third opponent, finding him encased in a bubble of dust held up by Fu. Naruto tried not to let his jaw drop in astonishment at how quickly Fu had managed to alter the technique Kakazu had trapped her in a week ago to be used with her own element. Impressed, she asked with a smirk, setting her free hand on her hip. "Jinro no jutsu, not bad, huh?" Then the dust prison technique broke, letting the rain genin drop to the floor. The Nanabi Jinchuriki scratched the back of her head, embarrassed. It was a gesture Naruto recognized as being strangely reminiscent of himself. Hey, whoops. Guess I don't have that jutsu perfected yet. The one-eyed boy tried to scramble away, but Haro was too fast, zipping forward and placing the tips of the dual katana at his throat. "Your scroll," Haro demanded, voice brooking no argument. His captive pointed one trembling finger towards his unconscious, blindfolded teammate. Naruto walked over to the boy's prone form and rooted around until he found the scroll. "Damn," he cursed, looking at the word on the front. "Earth scroll," he told his teammates, his expression sour. Fu sighed. So this was a waste of time. What now? "We take it," Haro said. "The less teams that pass, the better the odds are for us to move forward." He channeled chakra into the swords, sending electricity pulsing into the one-eyed boy, who promptly collapsed to the dirt, motionless. "He's alive," Haro stated coldly, feeling Naruto's glare at his back. "Fine," the blonde relented. "Let's go. LLL. Sabaku Q. Sand slithered up Shiga's leg, quickly encasing the older rain genin. In short order, only Shiga's face was visible, and his entire body was lifted 20 feet into the air. Sometimes, on the rare occasions between his constant insomnia and near-constant insanity, Gaara understood that the voice he heard in his head calling for blood was not his mother. His mother had died giving birth to him, cursing the village that had produced a Kazekage willing to seal a vicious demon into his unborn son, sacrificing his wife for the process. In those few moments of clarity, Gaara knew that the words whispered to him were from Shukaku, the one-tailed demon sand spirit. Having never known love, though, Gaara had deluded himself into believing that Shukaku was really mother. Gaara's life had been miserable since birth. He had been the object of numerous assassination attempts, neglected by his father, his siblings, his village, because of the biju sealed within him. The abilities afforded by Shukaku, total control over sand, an automatic defense, an armor of sand layered atop his skin, had gone unseen since the days of the Sandaime Kazekage, who had created his famed iron sand techniques based off of the previous Ichibi Jinchuriki's powers. The trade-off between his powers and the consequences of hosting the One Tail was something that always bothered Gaara. Yes, he escaped from every mission unscathed and he possessed sand manipulation powers rivaled by none, but if ever tried sleeping, the demon consumed his personality and sanity. That wasn't even mentioning the insatiable bloodlust. After living with the demon for so long, Gaara had long since become desensitized to the blood he was told to shed. Killing had become a way to verify his existence, to prove that he was still alive. It was an insane stretch of logical justification, but all Gaara wanted to do was please Mother. Mother wanted blood. Sabaku so-so. And it rained blood. As his sand absorbed the red fluid, Gaara turned his emotionless gaze to his victim's two teammates. While the tall Amnin had been an excellent sacrifice, he was not the redhead's true target. Here, take the scroll, offered the one on the right, placing said object on the ground. Yes, please spare us, pleaded the other one. Gaara stared at him, watching as their bodies trembled in fear at his show of power. These hidden rain ninja, they were weak. They offered no challenge to the Chunin, merely fodder for Mother's never-ending appetite. But there was someone whom the Jinchuriki was interested in, someone who hailed from the drenched plains of Am and who could perhaps slake Mother's thirst for blood. The girl with the pale green hair, something was different about her. Gaara wanted to hear her scream as his sand engulfed her, crushed her bones, and drank her life. She was a challenge, one he couldn't identify. But the demon inside him wailed for her capture, cried out for the redhead to smother and kill her with nary a thought. Her death would make Mother happy. Gaara wanted to please Mother. And if the blonde boy got in his way, well, the Chunin was sure that Mother would have no problem with an appetizer. I'm looking for someone. Female, light green hair, walking around with a blonde. She's also from a megacore. Tell me what you know about her and where she is, Gaara intoned. The two remaining Rain Genin exchanged nervous looks before the one on the right spoke up. We've never heard of her before. A hand made of sand reached up from the ground and grasped each ninja's leg. The sand quickly encased their bodies as Gaara stretched his arms out, hands pantomiming a grabbing gesture. Wrong answer. Sabaku so-so. As Kankuro walked forward and grabbed the scroll on the ground, Gaara turned and began to walk away. He cared little for his father's wishes regarding his part in Konoha's invasion or for passing the Chunin exams, he simply wanted that girl's blood. And he would have it. Let's go, he ordered his siblings. Temari and Kankuro exchanged a confused glance before following the younger brother out of the clearing. When Gaara was on a rampage, they'd learned that it was always best to stay away, lest they become unwilling victims. Hidden in the bushes, Inuzuka Kiba, Aburame Shino, and Hyuga Hinata shook in terror at the spectacle they had witnessed. As they silently recovered from what had just happened, the same thought passed through each of their minds. Kami help whoever he's looking for. LLL. Fu jumped beside Haro as the two followed Naruto through the forest of death. The trio had traveled in silence since their run-in with the Rain Ninja, though the quiet was rather tense in comparison to the one they'd been in before the encounter. She twirled a senbon idly between her fingers, a habit she had adopted completely by accident. During the trek through the forest, Kakazu had found the time to teach her the basics of a hidden rain technique using the umbrellas she had grabbed from the Akatsuki hideout, something he'd apparently done to help keep their cover. It had taken nearly 20 minutes to gather all the loosed senbon from her first practice with the technique, and she had sworn off trying the technique again until she needed it. Fu shook her head, she was getting off track. Something needed to be done about the animosity brewing between her two teammates. Haro, are you okay? The minute the words left her mouth, Fu knew that it was a stupid thing to ask. The cobalt-haired boy shot her a nasty look. No, I'm very displeased with Shinobu's, he seemed to speak Naruto's fake name like a curse, decision regarding those Amnin. We should have killed them. Fu noticed that despite the anger in his voice, Haro's tone was flat and even throughout his reasoning. There was no point, argued Naruto. I'm not going to let you kill some random ninja just to satisfy some personal grudge. We're in a war, returned Haro, raising his voice. You're in a war, Naruto was quick to correct, coming to a halt on a thick branch. And perhaps after this job is done you can get back to striking down some helpless genin all for the cause of your precious, Pain-sama. But right now, your mission is to participate in the Chunin exams and help us pass, and that is what you will do, he finished, punctuating each word carefully. Fu thought she could almost see the steam coming out of Haro's ears. All people had their boiling point, she had learned quickly that Kakazu's was rather low, but that Naruto had a high tolerance with his temper, barring 1 or 2 pressure points. If she was interpreting Haro's body language correctly, the green-haired girl was about to see his. Haro sprang forward, the thunder fangs extended towards Naruto's neck. The blonde whirled, bringing up his wakizashi and catching the top curves of each blade, both fists gripping the hilt of his sword. Haro's stormy grey eyes were narrowed in silent fury, and despite his lack of sword skill, he seemed to be pressing the blonde back with sheer determination and rage. "Oh, for the love of, will you two cut it out?" Fu cried, exasperated. The girl went ignored as the two broke apart, each staring down the other. Haro held the swords up, bringing the tips close together and gathering chakra in between the gap. A blue-white ball of lightning, about the size of a fist, formed at the tips as the Nin glared at Naruto. The blonde's wakizashi took on a blue sheen as he channeled his own chakra into it. Fu groaned. Even though she didn't know Haro's skill with lightning release, Futon trumped Raiten almost every time. The boys charged. "Oi, Fu!" All three members of Kakazu's team blinked, and, forgetting they were really undercover, turned in surprise to see who had interfered with their spat. A team of three were headed towards them and closing in rapidly. Fu felt her stomach clench uncomfortably, the fear that she would be recognized having come to pass. Soon enough, standing on a large tree branch less than 100 feet away were a trio of genin from the hidden waterfall, the only team from that village which had managed to pass the written test. Ironically, and to Fu's immense displeasure, the two male members of the team were the bullies from the day she had met Naruto. Joy. Their leader, Hoki, if Fu remembered his name correctly, opened his mouth to say something, but a ball of lightning and a wave of air forced him and his teammates to jump to the forest floor. Fu glanced back to see that both Naruto and Haro had loosed their attacks at this new presence, and were now focused wholeheartedly on the enemies in front of them rather than each other. Apparently it was not enough to deter Hoki. "Fu, you bitch," he shouted. "How dare you betray our village?" The Nanabe Jinchuriki merely rolled her eyes. "Yeah, 'cause clearly there was a lot of love for me back in Taki. Did no one wonder why I left? Did anyone even search for me?" Hoki continued to rant. "You were Takagaku's ultimate weapon, our chance to become great. You think that you can just leave and get away with it? Well, we're going to show you right here and now what happens when you go against us." Fu looked over her shoulder at Naruto, shooting the blonde a look that clearly asked, "Now what?" Naruto caught the gesture from the corner of his eye, his attention focused more intently on the three genin going through the same series of hand seals. His blue orbs flickered over to Haro, noticing that the boy hadn't moved but was paying attention to what was going on with a fierce intensity. They know Fu's identity, which makes them a threat to our mission. The green-haired girl cracked her knuckles, understanding his subtle message. She grinned. "Cool." Fu prepared to jump down and engage Hoki and his teammates. "Kaiten Renkejutsu, Karura." "No," ordered Naruto, quickly forming seals. The fiery dragon was bearing down on Fu's position, and Naruto supposed it would have been a more impressive technique had it been performed by a single, higher-level ninja. As it was, Sutin, Mazurappa, he finished, expelling a powerful jet of liquid from his mouth. Kisame had taught him the wild water wave technique as his first training exercise, stating that learning it was a requirement for all hidden mist ninja. While somewhat weak in theory, the secret of the technique was that its power varied with how much chakra was pushed into it. To combat the large dragon, Naruto was pouring in a decent amount of chakra. Steam blanketed the area as the Taki nin stopped their assault. Naruto stopped his defense, the inhale and exhale of his breathing noticeable for several seconds. He could only assume that their opponents had cut off their attack to conserve chakra. Recovering himself, he glanced at Haro. "Would you like the pleasure?" Haro smirked. "Gladly." And then he was gone. The remaining two gazed into the thick mass of vaporized water, trying to see anything. Several of the training sessions Kisame had put Naruto through included the use of Kirigakure no Jutsu, the art of hiding in the mist, and so the blonde's sight had improved slightly in the impaired conditions, but with how far away he was, and so Fu could see clearly, he slowly performed the hand signs for the wind release, violent wind palm and blasted the steam away. Now visible, Fu watched the scene below play out with interest. Haro had sheathed his twin katana and was all but dancing around the Taki nin, engaged in a strange taijutsu battle that he was clearly winning. She cocked her head in curiosity as her teammate ducked under a roundhouse kick and jabbed his thumb into the back of the boy's knee. When the Taki nin yelped in pain and jumped back awkwardly, Fu raised an eyebrow. The girl's own taijutsu training had been specifically modeled after Kakazu's combat style, which focused specifically on waiting for the opponent to move and countering said movements with the least amount of effort and greatest reward possible. Fu had been taken on several bounty hunting missions while under his tutelage for a year and had seen firsthand how effective the man's style was, a court punch followed by a vicious backhand and then a roundhouse kick powerful enough to shatter ribs. She had adapted relatively well to the style, but parts of it eluded her as Kakazu tended to use the black threads in his body to complement his fighting prowess. Naruto, well, she actually had never really seen her fellow Jinchuriki use a specific taijutsu style, mostly because he preferred to use varied ninjutsu, like his teacher. If she had to guess, the blonde's physical skills probably resembled that of their teachers. If less refined and powerful, Kakazu tended to hit hard, especially when bolstered by his earth spear technique. On the other hand, Haro appeared to be using a style similar to the Hyuga's-juken, though that should be impossible, considering that the cobalt-haired boy didn't have the Byakugan to see the body's chakra network. Interesting, commented Naruto, jumping to join Fu on her tree. He knows Kyusho Jutsu. Fu realized. That explains a lot. Kyusho Jutsu was a rarer branch of taijutsu that focused on striking the opponent's pressure points in order to disable or stall them. It was a difficult style to learn because it required knowledge of the human body, precision, and speed to use effectively, not to mention that it was difficult to pull off debilitating hits which had permanent or lasting effects. The orange-eyed girl wasn't entirely sure where Haro's speed was coming from, but he definitely appeared quite skilled with striking pressure points and evading other attacks. She glanced at Naruto from her periphery. The blonde was standing silently next to her, arms crossed and expression blank. He looked rather uninterested in his surroundings, as if one of his teammates was not, in fact, fighting against the odds for his life. Fu turned back to the battle. She could only hope Haro escaped unscathed. LLL. Haro dodged the majority of a small fire ninjutsu, taking a minor burn to his right leg. Kyusho Jutsu had its uses in combat, but more so when fighting one-on-one. Back under Pain's command, Haro had either been sent out on long-distance stealth, sniping missions or as part of Splinter Cells where incapacitating his opponents left room for his teammates to finish him off. However, with no backup forthcoming, he could only assume Naruto and Fu would stay away from the action unless he asked, and a depleting chakra supply. Haro was discovering the drawbacks of relying on it as a taijutsu style when outnumbered and alone. To dodge his opponents, Haro had been converting chakra to lightning, using the element in an original technique which drastically accelerated his reflexes and how fast he moved. The problem was that by using the move, the cobalt-haired boy had rather quickly used up the majority of his chakra. The only good news was that by sticking to taijutsu, he had conserved the remainder of it by not using any Raiten techniques. Most of the pressure points he had struck were restraint points, those designed to temporarily immobilize an opponent or cause them brief spasms of pain. But with his dwindling reserves, he needed to finish the battle, now. The three Waterfall ninja had regrouped in a loose triangle, preparing for another collaboration attack. Haro dipped into his reserves and pulled out enough chakra to jet forward, ending up in the center of the trio. In front of him stood the lone kunoichi, and he caught a look of shock on her features before driving up with the heel of his palm, striking the point in the underside of her jaw. She dropped like a sack of bricks. Instinct suddenly screamed for Haro to duck, and he fell to his side as Hoki's fist transited through the space he had just vacated. Hoki stumbled slightly with his momentum, falling to the ground as Haro swept his legs out from under him. The Amnin rolled to his feet, diving forward, and evading a hasty punch from the second Takinin, to strike Hoki's teammate in the sternal notch, activating his gag reflex and forcing him to hack air involuntarily. Haro took the opportunity to unsheath one of his swords and drive it through the boy's heart. The result was messy. With no formal sword training, Haro had aimed for the most vital and easily accessible organ in a rather simplistic stab. The hit probably would have been clean except that the Thunder Fangs, unlike most other swords, were not ideal for physical contact, the use lying primarily in Raiten ninjutsu, and the topmost curve was now keeping the katana embedded within the Takinin's corpse. A low growl sounded from behind him. "You'll pay for that," shouted Hoki, and Haro was forced to abandon the blade as the other boy tackled him from behind. Caught unaware by the move and at the end of his stamina, the cobalt-haired shinobi could do nothing as the older male sat on him and rained blow after blow on his face and body. He squirmed as best as he could to evade the punches, but he quickly realized that he was at a complete disadvantage. Then two hands grabbed Hoki's head and twisted. There was a crack as his neck was snapped. Well, that wasn't nearly as satisfying as I hoped it would be, Fu stated dispassionately, staring at the immobile body of Hoki. I'll never go back to Taki, she practically spat, uncaring whether or not her tormentor heard her. Haro sighed in relief and took his teammate's proffered hand. Naruto jumped down from his perch as Fu placed Haro's arm over her shoulders. The blonde walked over to the waterfall kunai Haro had downed first, leaning down to reach her wrist and check her pulse. His lips were pursed as he withdrew his wakizashi from its sheath. Centering the blade over her heart, he plunged it through her chest, removing it immediately afterwards. Find their scroll, he said, moving to the corpse of her teammate. Oh, right, Fu acknowledged. She all but dropped Haro to rummage through Hoki's clothes, while Naruto maneuvered the lone thunder fang from the other male Taki-nin's body. Wordlessly, he offered the blade to the grounded Haro, who took it without a sound. Found it, cheered Fu, and it's a heaven scroll, too, just what we need. She seemed to realize that she was interrupting something, for she suddenly fell quiet. You killed her, Haro observed, merely stating fact but failing to cover a tinge of surprise. Yes, agreed Naruto. His blue eyes were cold and hard, the eyes of a ninja who knew what needed to be done. There was no pity, sympathy, or remorse as Haro tried to analyze him. It was necessary. The Amnin peered at his teammate for a stretch of time, while Fu's eyes darted between the two. It was as if Naruto was a puzzle that Haro was trying to solve, but he couldn't find which piece went where. Finally though, Haro nodded at Naruto, as if finally accepting the blonde for his decision. All right, now, if you'll excuse me, and he promptly passed out. Naruto felt his vitals. Chakra exhaustion, he diagnosed. I guess we're setting up camp here for the night. Tomorrow we can head out. Fu smiled. So I guess those two can get along after all. LLL. It was only the second day within the Forest of Death, and Sai honestly had no idea what was going on anymore. With an odd number of graduates from the Ninja Academy, Danzo, the leader of the supposedly defunct Root organization, had pressured the Sandaime into allowing one of his subordinates to fill in the missing spot of the Genin teams. Though the third Hokage had initially been opposed to the idea, the support of his two former teammates, Mitokado Homura and Yutaten Koharu, two of the more prominent village council members, had essentially made his opinion null on the matter. So Sai had been assigned his current codename, been told his two teammates were Uchiha Sasuke and Haruno Sakura, and that they would be under the guidance of Hatake Kakashi. Two of the three names had rung familiar chimes within the boy's head at the time, and the third was of no importance. Danzo had informed him that his mission was to watch over Sasuke and make reports on his skills and progress. He wasn't sure what his leader's interest in the last Uchiha was, but it wasn't his place to question his instructions. Unfortunately, the parameters of the mission required Sai to interact with people, which meant exposure to emotions, something Sai hadn't experienced in many years. Part of Root's program involved the elimination of emotions in order to more effectively carry out the missions necessary to Konoha's survival. So while Sai had a clear goal of what needed to be done, his personality, or lack thereof, often clashed with those of his teammates, which made carrying out his mission slightly difficult at times. All things considered, he wasn't doing too terribly. Research and spying had revealed the purpose of Kakashi's initial test, which had allowed for Team 7 to become a true Genin team. The D-rank missions were an insult to someone of his skill. After all, Root was simply a secret subdivision of the Anbu Black Ops, but Sai bore all of it with a fake smile, because he understood the importance of following orders and obeying his superior. The truly difficult part was disguising his skills as those of a common Genin. Sparring practice and group training were the main issues. D-rank missions didn't require a high level of training, or any training at all, it could be argued, so performing those tasks while not revealing his skills had been easy. But every time Sai was forced to spar against Sasuke, or whenever Kakashi had them perform some random team exercise, the Root operative was often forced to tone down years of trained instincts to react as only an average Genin would. It was rather frustrating, to say the least. But he had passed those obstacles nonetheless. When the announcement that Team 7 would be entered in the Chunin exams had been made, Danzo had given Sai new orders. The exams presented the perfect opportunity to fully observe the results of Uchiha's rigorous training against his fellow ninja. Sai had been instructed to assist the boy in getting through the first two stages of the Chunin exams, the third stage would apparently be single matches in which Sai could have no influence on Sasuke's performance. The written test had been easy enough. Sai's specialty lay in drawing and painting creatures which served a multitude of purposes: reconnaissance, message relays, and battle, primarily. Sneaking out his specialized ink brush disguised as a pencil and using it to create animated flies which could spy for him had been simple. The theory was similar to several strains of Kikaichu bred by the Aburame clan specifically for reconnaissance purposes, if a tad less precise. It was the second exam which had so far completely thrown the root operative for a loop. Several hours before, he had been separated from his two teammates by a powerful burst of wind, a futon ninjutsu, he surmised. He had come face to face with a tremendous snake, but with no one around, he hadn't feared being caught going all out. Still, Sai was used to dealing with human-sized opponents, and so defeating the snake had taken more cunning and chakra than he'd expected. Perhaps the biggest surprise had come when the giant serpent had disappeared in a burst of smoke, much in the same way a summons would. The only people Sai knew of who could use snake summons were Mitarashi Anko, a likely possibility, considering the fact that she was proctoring the second exam, and Orochimaru, infamous traitor of the Hidden Leaf. Despite the likelihood of the snake belonging to Anko, the small possibility that it was Orochimaru spurred Sai into action. Though his ink birds were fast, the dense foliage of the Forest of Death would hinder their flight, and so Sai had taken to tree jumping back to where he had been separated from his teammates. He had found them both in the same clearing he had left them. Sakura was leaning against a tree, unconscious but otherwise okay. On the other hand, Sasuke was out cold on the ground, a stab wound on his leg and 2 puncture marks on the side of his neck, beside which were 3 comma-shaped markings, plus a fever and some other scrapes and bruises. Sai was no expert with seals, having only the one on his tongue which prevented him from speaking of Danzo, but seeing as how Sasuke had never had such a mark before, the dark-haired boy could only assume it was a recent, and therefore potentially dangerous, addition. He had summoned 2 ink lions from the scroll he used for all of his ninjutsu, and the bodies of his teammates were placed upon their backs. Sai had found a hollowed-out tree base where he was able to deposit the bodies, then use some extra cloth and water from his canteen to soothe the Uchiha's fever. Being a nursemaid to another ninja was slightly humiliating, but Sasuke was needed alive by Danzo, so Sai had buckled down and did what was necessary. Shortly thereafter, Sakura had regained consciousness and quickly took over caring for the raven-haired boy, much to the artist's relief. Of course, not long after that, the lone team of ninja from Otogako had arrived, forcing a weak Sakura and a tired Sai into battle in an attempt to get to Sasuke. Before too much damage was done, Rock Lee had appeared to defend Sakura, taking on the leader of the Sound Ninja and ultimately failing. Shortly thereafter, Yamanaka Ino, Nara Shikamaru, and Akamaiki Choji had revealed their presence and attempted to fight the Oto team. Sai would admit they did an okay job, as far as being novices went. After their failure, Lee's teammates Hyuga Neji and Tenten had arrived, searching for the spandex-wearing genin. Before they could even interfere, Uchiha Sasuke had awakened, flame-like markings spreading from the assumed seal on his neck and covering the left side of his body. He had stood and easily incapacitated one of the Oto nin, and more likely than not would have killed him if Sakura had not prevented him from doing so. Sai was inwardly grateful to not have to fight, for it solidified the image of a mediocre ninja with no special skills. Despite that, he was unable to fully comprehend the reasons for the other Konoha genin to intrude into Team 7's fight. He understood the why: emotions, messy fickle feelings, pride, rage, affection, controlled their actions, but beyond that, there was no explanation for entering a fight which did not concern them. It made Sai glad that he no longer had the capacity to feel emotions. They seemed to cause a lot of unnecessary trouble. As the leader of the Sound team placed down his scroll and retreated with his 2 teammates, Sai vaguely registered the Ino-Shika Cho trio coming out from the bushes and heading over to Lee's immobile form. With everything that had passed in the forest, Sai had a long report to make to Danzo, once he found the time to discreetly do so. High in the tree upon which he and Tenten had landed, Hyuga Neji shifted his Byakugan eyes slightly, looking to the bushes on the other side of the clearing. 3 people became clear to his vision, and he was able to make out the symbols on their forehead protectors. A Megacore, he thought. He wondered if they'd attack, but when one of them signaled the other 2 to follow the path of the departed Sound team, Neji let them go. If they would rather waste their time with a scroll-less team than take on 3 separate groups of Leaf genin, who was he to get in their way? LLL. Konoha Nin aloud, Naruto thought, leading Haro and Fu quietly through the undergrowth. Their team had spent the previous evening camped out at the site of their battle with the Waterfall team, after removing the corpses from the vicinity, of course. Haro had woken up after a couple of hours to drink some water and eat a small amount of food before returning to sleep. The next morning found the cobalt-haired boy at half strength, but capable of moving. So they had, if at a more sedate pace than the first day. But with 4 days left of the test, and their only goal being to reach the tower in the center, none of the three were worried about time. It was only when Naruto had broken off from their straight path around noon that his two team members had become confused. I hear something, he had offered quietly by way of explanation. The scene they had come across had been rather hectic. Leaf Genin had all but crawled out of the metaphorical woodwork, combating the threat the strangely garbed, opposing ninja team had presented. Can we go? Haro had scowled. Not yet, Naruto had replied. He turned to the other male. What do you know about that team? He continued, motioning towards the trio all the leaf ninja were fighting. Both Haro and Fu had glanced from the blonde to the other ninja and then back again. Fu shrugged as Haro succinctly stated, nothing. The blonde had nodded. Exactly. If there's one thing Izo sensei taught me, it's that the more information you have, the better. Right now, I have no information on those guys, and my gut is telling me not to trust M. His attention returned to the scene they had been spying on, curses flying from his mouth when he realized they were gone. Come on, he motioned, before slipping away. Which led Naruto, Haro, and Fu to their current scenario of moving along the ground, following the unknown team. Where did they go? Muttered Naruto. Kakazu, check the area, will ya? You're not a very good tracker, are you? Haro commented dryly. Not particularly, admitted the Jinchuriki. But once I find someone, they're in trouble. You know, he continued after a moment, you're being oddly cooperative, all things considered. Haro leveled him with an even stare. I told you, I'm a strategist. You gave me a compelling reason to follow them, and you proved to me that you know what you're doing with those tacky nin. He took a deep breath. You're right. My own desire to kill that team was not in line with this mission, which should be my focus. I've decided that if we're to get through this, I'm better off working with you than against you, which means accepting your decisions. From now on, I'm dedicated to whatever you say our objective is, as long as it makes sense. Naruto seemed to take this admission in stride, but after a brief moment he nodded. There was silence as Naruto wondered if he should say something, but Fu preempted him with a hesitant, guys. Zankua. Naruto kicked Haro into Fu and dove away just before a powerful blast of air swept through the place they had just vacated. The blonde wiped his brow with the back of his hand and let out a silent breath of relief. That was a bit too close. Come out, shouted a voice, we know you're there. All three exchanged glances before stepping out from the foliage to face their opponents. Naruto recognized the majority of their outfits from the Akatsuki hideout. Each wore gray pants with black splotches in a camouflage pattern, as well as a long scarf of the same design wrapped around their throats. One of them, Naruto guessed he was the leader, though he couldn't say why, had bandages wrapped around his entire face, save the left eye. The sleeves of his gray shirt, which were slightly darker than the pants, were abnormally long, and a large furry object, a cape was the closest thing Naruto could describe it as, covered his back. His male teammate possessed dark, spiky hair with two face plates starting from under his forehead protector and following his jawline. One of his arms looked to be either dislocated or broken. He wore a short-sleeved yellow shirt and tight black cloth over his forearms. Two black stripes were imprinted on the shirt from his collarbone to under his armpits, and a third went around his waist, separating one of the three kanji for death on his shirt from the other two. His female teammate wore the same forearm bands as well as a sleeveless vest, and a second scarf was wrapped around her waist much like a belt. Her long, dark hair fell almost to the ground. Wrapped around each of their foreheads was a hate, the same, unknown symbol of a musical note engraved in the metal. Who are you? Asked the partial mummy. I could ask you the same thing, retorted Naruto. What village are you from? The spiky-haired boy laughed. You've never heard of Otogakure. You amnin are all pathetic. Zaku, shut up, hissed the first male. Oh, come on, Dosu, you can't tell me you think these little babies present a challenge. Otogakure, queried Fu. Where's that, and why haven't we heard of it? Oto is a new village set up within the land of rice paddies, led by Orochimaru-sama. Bragged Zaku. Naruto and Haro shared a look which clearly said, he's a talker. This is our first appearance in the Chunin exams, and we're here to show just how powerful we are, and to fulfill Orochimaru-sama's desires. We'll have to go back and find a way to kill Uchiha Sasuke, he directed to Dosu. Zaku warned his teammate, stop talking. And with the curse seal in play, I'm not sure if killing the Uchiha is a good idea, let alone a possibility. The mention of Orochimaru placed Naruto on edge. He knew nothing of the man personally, only that his reputation preceded him. If the renegade Sannin was influencing the Chunin exams in some way, Naruto and his team would have to be extra careful. It did offer an explanation for why Kakazu had come to Konoha in the first place, though Orochimaru had a huge price on his head. Naruto was unsure of the exact value, which meant that he was extraordinarily skilled, a fact which accounted for Kakazu's uncertainty in winning a battle against him. There was a moment of silence as Naruto turned over the information he had just heard in his head, the team from Hidden Sound subtly preparing to attack. Everyone seemed to realize the time for talk was over, for Naruto and Dosu ordered at the same time, kill them. Zankua! Shouted Zaku. The three fake genin scattered to escape the blast. Kin, now. The female, Kin, apparently, threw a flurry of senbon at Naruto, but the blonde easily dodged them. Chiming sounded out from behind him, and Naruto turned to see several of the senbon stuck in a large tree, tiny bells attached to them. Then the double vision began. Naruto tried to stop the world from spinning, but he guessed that he was trapped in some sort of illusion. I think I'm gonna hurl. Because Kakazu never used genjutsu in actual combat, he had merely taught Naruto the basics of dispelling the illusionary techniques. During the course of being taught how to escape genjutsu, Kakazu had inflicted several types of illusions he had picked up during his early years upon the blonde. The lesson Naruto had learned was that he was rather susceptible to that branch of the ninja arts, and that he could really only break a couple of the weaker ones with the traditional genjutsu release theory. It was a bit of a debilitating weakness in certain scenarios, but fortunately the blonde's healing abilities were enough to offset the danger his susceptibility to genjutsu could get him in. Fu watched as Naruto fell to his knees and clapped his hands over his ears. She moved to try and help him, but another flurry of senbon peppered the area between her and him. The spiky-haired sound nin, Zaku, she remembered, was keeping Haro preoccupied. The fight was surprisingly even, Zaku's loss of an arm counteracted by Haro's incomplete recovery from the previous day. Kin was preventing her from interfering with Naruto, allowing Dosu to zip forward and slam a strange device attached to his arm into Naruto's stomach with a brutal uppercut. Naruto coughed up a mixture of blood and bile, the red fluid also trickling out of his ears and soaking his head covering. Disoriented, with his vision swimming violently, Naruto could only grudgingly accept that the sound nin had a fair amount of talent, comparatively speaking, anyway. He vaguely registered the echoing of Dosu's voice, the mummified boy explaining how the device on his arm, the melody arm, altered sound waves to confuse and injure the foe. Their village was aptly named then, if all of their abilities revolved around the manipulation of sound and sound waves to gain the upper hand over their opponents. The blue-eyed boy squinted in an attempt to settle his vision. There was a slight glint of sunlight on metal, and Naruto could finally focus enough to realize that the bells Kin had thrown were attached to the senbon by ninja wire. Despite his dizziness, he unsheathed his wakizashi and swung haphazardly, applying futon chakra to cleave the wires in two. The simple movement caused waves of nausea to roll over him, but he felt a sense of accomplishment in spite of his vertigo. You can still move, huh? Came Dosu's voice from above him. I'll take care of that. He swung down with the melody arm, this time targeting Naruto's head. Naruto! Cried Fu, forgetting to use his alias in her panic. She took two senbon to the thigh and one to the shoulder for the distraction. Enough's enough, floated through Naruto's head. The blonde wasn't entirely sure how well he could control his faculties, between the damage from the melody arm and the dissipating effects of Kin's illusions, but pain suddenly flooded his body as Jiongu forcibly took over. Black threads shot out from the stitches in his left forearm, wrapping around Dosu's attacking arm. The tendrils wriggled into the holes of the melody arm, working to negate the threat which caused their user harm. Dosu tried to use his chakra to amplify the damage his weapon did, but the threads were unresponsive to the assault. Naruto's other forearm lashed out, attached to his body only by the cable-like threads, and grabbed the sound ninja around the neck. As more of Jiongu's tendrils slithered out from Naruto's arms to restrain Dosu, the blonde spared a careful look at his teammates. Haro was stuck on the defensive, unable to find the time to either move close to strike pressure points or back away to use his patented lightning techniques, with Zaku shooting continuous blasts of air at him. He turned his head the other way, vision swimming with the movement, to see Fu countering salvos of Senbon from Kin with her own needles. The QB Jinchuriki lurched to his feet, stumbling in the process as his equilibrium was thrown even more off balance. "I'd love to stay longer," he informed Dosu, fighting down nausea in the process, "but I'm pretty sure I don't want to be hit by your little toy again." The mummified boy's visible eye widened marginally. Naruto fought to regain control of Jiongu, the struggle reminding him of his initial training with the Kinjutsu. Finally, recovering some measure of his equilibrium, he exerted enough willpower to extend his free left hand with the threads to grab his fallen sword, making sure to keep the tendrils from his forearm wrapped around the Melody arm. Focusing intently upon Dosu's neck to control his strike, he took a second to steady himself before slicing the blade across his opponent's carotid artery. Nausea reclaimed him, and Naruto wondered absent-mindedly how much damage Dosu had inflicted to him with the one strike to still be feeling the effects. There was a slight slurping noise as Jiongu returned to his body, allowing Dosu's corpse to drop to the floor and his lower arms to reconnect with his elbows. Pushed to the back of his mind were the clamoring thoughts regarding the almost sentient nature of Jiongu's tendrils. All he could think of was helping his teammates. Naruto knew that he had no chance of using a pinpointed attack, so a broad one would have to do. He closed his eyes to better concentrate, discovering that without the double vision he could more easily focus on his goal. "Damn fox," he snarled, "why can't you help me now?" A dark chuckle echoed in his mind. This hardly qualifies as mortal peril. A little pain teaches one to not make the same mistake. You may consider that your help, child. Naruto was startled at the actual response, but he ignored it to the best of his abilities. His hands moved through the seals for the great breakthrough technique, opening his eyes long enough to send the large wall of wind towards Zaku. The spiky-haired boy turned around, shouting, "Zankukyokua!" The powerful blast of air countered Naruto's attack, completely dissipating the great breakthrough and allowing the residual of the attack to sweep over him. Several cuts appeared on his clothes and exposed skin, and Naruto idly wondered how disoriented he was to have one of his base attacks at a low enough level to be countered so easily. He slumped to the ground, using the trunk of the tree behind him as a backrest. Meanwhile, Zaku was crowing in delight. "How pathetic. I don't even know how you fools got this far with such mediocre skills. This is the perfect warm-up for taking out Zenkai." The earth broke and collapsed as a triangular bolt of lightning rampaged through it. Zaku released a short scream as he was engulfed in the blast, the powerful attack frying him almost instantly. Naruto closed one eye, spying Haro not far Zaku's position, his hands to the ground. The rain ninja was breathing heavily, and Naruto was about to comment on a job well done before Haro fell on his back, unmoving. Shiri Soho no Jutsu. Leaving the thought of Haro to later, Naruto smirked to himself, closing his other eye to nurse his double vision. It sounded as if Fu was getting ready to finish her battle. Despite the prevalence of dust in the atmosphere, Fu often complained that it was too much effort to collect enough for a legitimate attack quickly. As such, she had created the dust touch technique to turn non-living, solid materials to dust and increase the quantity of her specialization. She had explained all this to him on the way to the Akatsuki hideout, so he knew that next would come a powerful dust release move, like Jingarden. Naruto cocked his head in mild confusion. It wasn't quite what he was expecting, but it worked, he supposed. He had discovered that, because of Hidden Waterfall's focus on Suiten techniques and hatred of the Nanabi, Fu had been left in the dust. He chuckled quietly at the unintentional pun, in studying earth and wind releases to combine into Jinten. As a result, she had practiced and created many of those specialized attacks, such as the performed dust release, dust fang bullet, based on many water attacks, the Suigarden in this case. When he had called her a copycat and a cheat, she had merely retorted that dust was far more common and easier to create than water was, and he had promptly shut up. It was both humiliating and humbling to recognize that she was right. Footsteps brought him back to his senses, and Naruto opened one eye to see Fu standing above him, hands on her hips. He saw her orange eyes shift over to Haro's prone form before she sighed. "Boys," she huffed with a roll of her eyes. Naruto tried to smile at her, but it came out as more of a grimace. Fu ignored the gesture and walked over to Haro, picking him up and carrying him over to where Naruto was leaning against the tree. Chakra exhaustion, again, she stressed, laying him on the ground. Honestly, what the hell were you two doing? And why did you let him fight when he wasn't fully recovered? He's a bit difficult to stop when you have, no balance, Naruto groaned. Fu rolled her eyes for a second time. Honestly, what am I supposed to do with you two? She asked rhetorically. Looks like we're here for another night. We'll have to get to the tower tomorrow. Naruto nodded, but stopped, the motion making him sick again. He thought he could hear the QB laughing at him from his mindscape. Bastard, he thought. Then sleep claimed him. When Naruto woke in the late morning the next day, the first thing he noticed was that the world no longer spun. He sat up, fighting a brief sense of vertigo, then swiveled his head to see if his balance had been restored. When his self-diagnosis was finished, he stood and stretched. Everything seemed fine. Oh, you're awake, remarked Fu. She strolled over and gave him a small amount of the rations she had scavenged from the forest, as well as a canteen. He drank greedily as she continued. Haro woke about 15 minutes ago. We're ready to leave when you are. The blonde shot her a quick thumbs up, and she nodded in response. They vacated the clearing 5 minutes later. Haro looked a bit paler than normal, and Naruto guessed that he had recovered maybe 30% of his total chakra. Fu kept shooting the cobalt-haired boy worried glances, as if expecting him to collapse at any moment. Fortunately, tree jumping didn't require a large exertion of energy, and after several hours of travel, they reached the tower in the center of the forest. All three stared at the building, the same thought drifting through their minds. Thank Kami. LLL. After living for close to a century, Kakazu had acquired a fondness for reading old books. Information was power, and it was impressive what one could learn from texts with enough time and dedication. As such, he'd taken to checking out books from the Konoha library and poring over them, taking advantage of the opportunity presented to him while stuck within a village he hated. Unfortunately, the process was frustrating. Originally, he had hoped that information on Orochimaru would be available, but because he was a foreigner, there were too many restrictions on what he could and could not look at. Even a hidden leaf citizen probably wouldn't be able to find much on one of his village's major traitors in a public area. It was an annoying obstacle to come across because the man's talents were a mystery. The root of the issue actually lay in the fact that a large amount of the higher-level ninja, mostly S-class, but some A-class, did not have their full abilities listed within any edition of the Bingo book, either Hidden Village or Bounty Hunter versions. This was because, while several S-class ninja were generally renowned far and wide, few other ninja either knew their skills or lived through encounters to report on them. Kakazu's book, which was much more expansive than the normal one, was surprisingly lacking in this area as well. If Zetsu's, Konin's, and Orochimaru's absent profiles were any indication, thought at least the Snake Sannin had an entry, albeit an uninformative one. Kakazu appreciated the secrecy in his own case, but it became a rather frustrating occurrence when he needed the information for his own uses, especially when he was going up against someone of Orochimaru's caliber. Finding an apparent dead end there, the mercenary had moved on to a different research topic, the Uzumaki clan. The bad thing about living a long time was that, while he could retain a lot of information, some of the older tidbits got lost to time. He could vaguely remember hearing about the existence of an Uzumaki clan, but so far as he knew, its members had never held prominence in any of the main villages, and whispers of them had disappeared decades ago, meaning that he'd stopped giving them attention. It was like trying to recall the days when Taki had wanted to claim glory and sought ways to eliminate people the likes of Kinkaku and Ginkaku of the Hidden Cloud. He could remember the names, but nothing pertinent about them. His student's lack of information about his own family was intriguing, though it was hard to say exactly why he was putting in such legwork for the blonde. Originally, the boy had been a way for him to get more money, and he'd raised him the same way he'd trained himself back in the founding days of the hidden villages. At some point, and he could probably trace it to Naruto's similarities to himself, the same reason he'd bestowed the Earth Grudge Fear Kinjutsu upon him, Kakazu had changed his mind about what his pupil would be to him. He would be more than just a source of income, he'd become a message the Nukenon wanted to deliver to the world. Naruto still had a long ways to go, however. He was inexperienced in actual combat, which was probably as much Kakazu's fault as it was the blonde's, not that he would ever admit it, and his training was spread thin in several different directions, leaving him woefully non-specialized. It would be a boon later on, when he would have a broad range of skills to call upon and the expertise to back them, but at this stage, it could just be considered confusing. He was also, sadly, arrogant about his abilities, a trait he probably picked up from his teacher, and as Kakazu frequently pointed out, the blonde's arrogance had yet to be earned. One day, the younger thread user would become a top-notch shinobi, but until that point, Kakazu fully expected him to misstep, learn from his mistakes, and stumble along the path, and the mercenary would be there to ridicule his student every step of the way, pushing him to become better. A knock sounded at the main door of his room, drawing him from his musings, and he called out, "Yes." The voice that returned to him was pure business. "Anbu," he guessed. "Your team just checked in. They have passed the second stage of the Chunin exams. I am here to escort you to the tower in preparation for the third stage." "Very well," Kakazu acknowledged. He placed down the scroll he had been reviewing and went to open the door. "Lead the way. Naruto, Orochimaru, just what are you both capable of? Time marches on, I suppose I will find out soon enough." That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.